All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Michelle Mays, and I am the founder of Partner Hope. And this is our first Facebook Live in the Hope After Betrayal Facebook group. So we're kind of learning as we go in terms of how to do this. So you're going to be on the journey with us as we figure it out. So here's what I want to talk to you about today. I want to give you like a little history lesson. And I want to give you a history lesson about where things have been historically in terms of treating betrayal trauma, and then where we're going in terms of treating betrayal trauma. So I want us to think about it just to give you guys a perspective on how the people who are trying to help you and help you heal from betrayal have been thinking about this issue and where the thinking has changed and where the thinking is going. So for some of you have been in this journey for a while. You've been at it for a bit. You've found good therapy. You've found good support, and you've probably read a ton and listened to a ton of podcasts. So some of what I'm saying may not be new for you. It may be stuff that you kind of know. You've gotten the lay of the land because you've been at it long enough. For others of you, you may be brand new to betrayal, and so this may all be new information for you. So my hope is that this information will really help kind of speed you on your way and give you a sense of, oh, okay, here's where things have been, here's where things are going. And as I look around for resources and support and therapists and coaches and the gamut of people out there that can help you, this is what I want to look for. So that's what we're going to do today. So, other thing before I dive into the material is I know that there are a bunch of you who are partners of sex addicts. So there are a bunch of folks in this group who are dealing with sex addiction and being partners of sex addicts. Then there are another ton of you in this group who are dealing with garden variety infidelity. You're dealing with cheating. You're dealing with an affair that is not connected to sex addiction and is separate and separate from addiction. So I'm a certified sex addiction therapist. I've been working in the field of sex addiction treatment for almost 20 years now. And so a lot of my thinking has come out of treating that population, though I do a ton of work also with people who are dealing with infidelity that's separate from addiction. I think most of what I am going to say pertains to both. And we're going to try really hard in this Facebook group and in the resource that we give you to address things that address both populations and where all of you can feel like you're getting the support that you need. So some of what I'm going to talk about today kind of starts in the sex addiction treatment community, but it has an influence how people who are dealing with affairs and infidelity are treated and thought about as well. So there's some overlap there. All right, so let's do our little history lesson. So where things start, where I'm going to start our history lesson is I'm going to start our history lesson with Patrick Carnes. So Patrick Carnes, some of you may have heard his name before. He's kind of the father of the sex addiction treatment community. And back in 1983, so that's like, what's going on 50 years, y'all? That's like a while ago. So back in 1983, he published a book called Out of the Shadows. And this was the very first book that had ever been published about sex addiction. And so he was the first person to use that language and put a model out for thinking about compulsive sexual behaviors and thinking about how to treat it. And what he did in that book is he basically borrowed from the substance abuse community. So he looked over at the community of people who were treating alcoholism and were treating drug use and abuse. And he borrowed their addiction model and applied it to sexuality and compulsive sex. And so he really felt like the model of addiction fit in terms of compulsive sexuality as well. And so he brought that overlay on. And he was really kind of ahead of his time because now here we are almost 50 years later. And what we know is that, yes, processes can also be addictions. So it isn't just drugs and alcohol that are addictive. It's also anything having to do with money. You can have a spending addiction. You can have a gambling addiction. You can have food addiction. You can have sex addiction. You can have love addiction. So processes can also be addictive. So he was kind of ahead of his game, of the game there on that. Now, what he did in that book is he also talked about betrayed partners. So he did give a voice and acknowledgement to all the partners of sex addicts that existed and talked about what the experience was like for them. And what he did is he borrowed again from the substance community. So in the substance treatment community, they had really identified that within like alcoholic families, that the whole family system was very sick often, and that everybody in the system was sort of revolving around the alcoholic and impacted by the alcoholic. And what they did is they called this codependency. That's the name that it became known as, is that the family members were often dealing with codependency. And what they were doing is they were really saying that the symptoms that people who are living with addiction or who are living with alcoholism and those kinds of things, the symptoms that they exhibit and the behaviors that they exhibit are their own type of sickness. And they called that sickness codependency. So what Patrick Carnes did is he took this idea and applied it to partners of sex addicts. And he said partners of sex addicts are codependent or co-addicted. That's another term that was used. And all the symptoms that they're exhibiting in the wake of dealing with betrayal and finding out about sexual betrayal are codependency and co-addiction. So that was sort of the model that was put forward in terms of thinking about what's happening to partners who are experiencing sexual betrayal and experiencing everything that goes with that. And that model of co-addiction and codependency was used to treat partners. So there were lots of books written about this in the years following, and there were people like Lori Hall and Charlotte Davis Castle and Jennifer Schneider, all who wrote books for betrayed partners, kind of unpacking this model further. And most of you know that I was in a relationship, in a marriage with somebody who is sex addicted. And so I've gone through my own process of recovery. And back when I was in recovery, those are the books that I had. That was what was available to me. And so those books were tremendously helpful to me. And they helped me heal and they helped me walk into freedom. And so I really have a lot of respect for those authors and the work that they did and the way that they broke ground for helping us think about the experience of betrayed partners and what's happening for betrayed partners. So then in 2010, so I just want you to notice that it took almost like 40 years for us to get here. It's quite some time, but a lot was happening in the entire counseling field during this period. So in 2010, Barbara Steffens and Marsha Means published a book called Your Sexually Addicted Spouse. And this came out of a bunch of research that they did. And what that book did is it applied the trauma model to partners. So what it said is people who are going through betrayal, who have experienced sexual betrayal, they are experiencing a relational trauma. And in the same way that we treat other traumas, the same treatments, the same thinking apply also to betrayed partners. So one of the things that Barbara Steffens found in her research is that most betrayed partners qualify for a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. And she really looked at the different symptoms that fall under that diagnosis and said, these are all the symptoms that partners are exhibiting. So rather than the behaviors that partners have after betrayal being thought of as codependence or co-addiction, now we as a field started to know, no, these are actually trauma symptoms. These are reactions. These are the ways people behave when they've experienced a trauma. And that's what's actually happening for partners. So as a field, we've kind of gotten that. We've kind of gotten the understanding that this is trauma. This is betrayal trauma that we're dealing with. And that's what's going on. For partners, they have these trauma symptoms, and we're no longer really using a lot of the language of co-addiction and codependency when we think about betrayal trauma itself. All right, so that's kind of where we've been. Now, where are we going? Where do I think we need to go next? And so this has to do with my work on working with betrayed partners. I have a book coming out about this next year, and really focusing on kind of the next layer of thinking on how we treat betrayal trauma. So for me, when I think about betrayal trauma, I think that it is not just a trauma, but it's the relational piece, it's the relational component, and what happens to our attachment systems inside our bodies that actually drives most of our behaviors and most of what happens in our relationships after we've experienced betrayal. So, for example, so two of the people who have really impacted my thinking are Sue Johnson, and Sue Johnson is the founder of emotionally focused therapy for couples. And she has done a lot of work on how do you treat attachment injuries. So attachment injuries are the injuries that happen in a primary relationship when you look to your partner for them to be there for you and you are in a moment of acute need, you are in a moment of acute trust, and they drop the ball. They are not there for you. They break the trust. They violate the trust in the relationship. So infidelity almost always creates a very significant attachment injury. And if you're dealing with sex addiction, you're dealing with repeated infidelity and chronic infidelity often, which again is going to create a pattern of attachment injuries. So Sue Johnson and her thinking on attachment injuries has really impacted my thinking on betrayal trauma. And then the other person who's really impacted my thinking is Jennifer Freyd. And Jennifer Freyd is actually the person who founded betrayal trauma theory. I don't know if you guys know this. So often in our, world as betrayed partners, we use the language of betrayal trauma to talk about sexual betrayal between adults, right? Jennifer Freyd, when she founded betrayal trauma theory, she was actually working on that in terms of children and what happens in family systems when children are abused. So betrayal trauma theory actually started back there, and now we've really been able to take that and apply it to adult relationships and what happens in adult relationships. So here's what Jennifer Freyd did, though, when she introduced this theory that is so relevant for us as betrayed partners. So what she said is, if we look at the field of post-traumatic stress, the trauma field, right? Traditional trauma would say the thing that creates the most damage and drives all the symptoms that people experience when they've experienced a trauma is fear. It's fear and terror. And that fear and terror is at the core of everything. And it's at the core of what creates post-traumatic stress for people. Well, what Jennifer Freyd argued is it's not fear that's at the core. Fear is a big factor, don't get me wrong. It's a huge factor, right? But it's not fear that it's the core, that is at the core. What's at the core is betrayal. What's at the core is the experience of having a person that you trust, that you depend on, that you believe has your back, who is your primary person in the world. It is the experience of having them betray your trust and betray you in a way that dissolves and disrupts and diminishes your attachment to them. That takes that attachment and basically ruptures it. That is betrayal. And it's betrayal and the experience of betrayal that actually drives most of the trauma symptoms that people experience. So this is also what I believe. I believe that as a field, as we're thinking about treating betrayal trauma, we now need to go the next step past the trauma model. And we now need to really think about, okay, what is happening to our attachment systems? So our attachment systems are bodily based, right? Our attachment system is in our body. So we use the language of poetry. We use the language of the two shall become one to talk about like getting married, our primary relationship with our partner. But that language is actually, the language of poetry is actually reflecting science. Because when we form up into pairs, so when we pair bond, when we get married, when we're in long-term relationships, we actually start to become one physiological unit. So we actually become an organism with our partner. So our partner regulates our heart rate, our breathing, our level of hormones, our blood pressure. Like our partner regulates our body, and our attachment systems are intertwined, and we are now one physiological system with them. So when you are in that kind of a relationship, and then that person cheats on you, and that person lies to you, and maybe they do it a lot. Maybe they do it for years. Maybe they do it chronically. Then imagine what's happening to your attachment system and all your bodily based systems that are now impacted by this rupture in this attachment, right? This total disconnection suddenly that happens. So this is the thing that I think we need to be looking at for betrayed partners and really thinking about, is that if we don't understand what's happening to our attachment systems and how that dynamic is what's driving everything that follows, all the things that betrayed partners go through, all the different symptoms and all the different ways that that post-betrayal, after you discover betrayal is experienced, all of it is driven by your attachment system and what's happening to your attachment system. So in my thinking about this and in my writing about this and in my blogging and all of it, I'm really focused on helping everybody understand this impact and what happens to us in our attachment system. So I want to share my screen with you real quick. I'm going to show you a slide. I want to show you a quick graphic. That's not it. Hang on. A quick graphic to help you kind of understand this idea. All right. So here in the center of the graphic, we've got relational disconnection. So the very first thing that happens when betrayal happens, when we discover betrayal, is there's immediate disconnection of our relationship. There's a rupture. The bond is disturbed and it's ruptured, okay? And we experience disconnection. The body experiences relational disconnection as a threat. Our threat system immediately fires. We immediately feel that we are in danger. So the very first thing that happens is relational disconnection occurs, and now we're in danger. That then puts our whole body into attachment distress. So our attachment system that is in this relationship with our partner, and we're one organism with them, now our attachment system is in enormous distress because this relationship and this attachment has been ruptured and betrayal has entered in and trust has been lost. So then after the attachment distress creates emotional dysregulation. So this is the emotional roller coaster that you're on as a betrayed partner, right? This is the pain and sadness and loss and more pain and anger. And then you've got a day where you feel like maybe it's going to be okay. And then you've got a day where it feels like it's not going to be okay. I have to leave. And you're back and forth, back and forth. Like, this is the emotional dysregulation. It's being driven by what's happened in your attachment system and the relational disconnection. And then out of that emotional dysregulation, then you have the relational trauma symptoms that partners have. And this is basically how you're behaving after you experience betrayal trauma. And every betrayed partner in the world knows that all of a sudden they've kind of lost who they used to be. And now they're this person who's got all these behaviors as they're trying to cope with what has happened to them. And these behaviors are driven by the relational disconnection that's at the core of betrayal trauma. All right, so that's our little history lesson. Hang on, I'm going to stop my sharing of the screen here for a minute. All right, so that's our little history lesson, and also just a way for you to think about what is happening to you and understanding, oh, okay, I've got to really understand what's happening to my attachment system, what's happening to my the relational part of me, and then how is that playing out as I go forward and deal with the infidelity, with the sex addiction, whatever it is that I'm dealing with. So I hope that's been helpful for you all. So I have developed a program, a 12-week coaching program for betrayed partners, and it is based on this model. So it is based on really taking a deep, deep dive into understanding what is happening from an attachment perspective, and then how to change that and how to heal. And how to heal much more quickly, because you really understand the core of it and the core of what's going on for you. So if you have any interest in that program and in talking to us, schedule a call with us. We're going to put the link in the Facebook group so that you have the link. So if you want to, you can just schedule a call and hop on the phone, and you can talk with us for about 45 minutes, and we will work with you to kind of figure out where you're at, where you're stuck, and whether or not this program might be a good fit for you. And even if it is not a good fit, we'll have spent 45 minutes just helping you think about where you're at and what might be the next steps for you in terms of going forward. So schedule a call if you'd like to talk with us about that. And then I will see you the next time we do a Facebook Live next week. Thanks so much. Talk to you later.